Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Gray Lane, welcome back to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you, Paul.
I believe you were, and I did not look this up. I think I had this memorized. You were episode 46. Rat Daddy Accountant was the name of it back when I was using titles other than people's names. I found it's much simpler just to use the name so friends and loved ones can find the darn things versus Rat Daddy Accountant. I'm not sure anybody would think to look that up.
Right.
The last time we spoke, besides our very recent conversations, I think it'd been a couple of years, maybe 3 years. And I was reaching out to you because I had an idea that I wanted to run by you related to your alma mater. And then you blew my doors off with what you told me had happened in your life since we had last spoken 3 years ago. And I'll just say it at a high level, you had a very bad relationship with substances, and we're going to get into the details of that. And you got to a really bad place, and then you transformed, and we'll talk about that process of transformation into a place where you are so much healthier in every sense of the word. And we're going to talk about all that. So we're going to talk about the journey to rock bottom. We're going to talk about the process and the experience of transformation, and then what life's been like on the other side of that. I'm ecstatic to tell this story. Before we started recording, you said, "Hey, I don't know how interesting this is." It's extremely interesting to anybody that has a heart, and I think I extend that to anybody that has a brain. What you told me is incredible. I have a tough time actually wrapping my head around that. So let's start with childhood, and we can remind people you and I have known each other. When did you guys move to town? How old were you?
1980. I was 6 years old.
Okay, in 80, I was 11. So yes, since I was 11, since you were 6, we've known each other. And our moms, we went to church together, right? Every Sunday. I think a lot of Wednesday night suppers. Your mom and my mom, best friends. So we've taken some vacations together. So you and I know each other pretty well. I'm a fan of your family. I think you're a fan of my family. Like, it's all good across the board kind of thing, especially when we think back to our childhood. All right.
Absolutely.
I don't know the answer.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was going to say, you and I worked together some summers, like painting your dad's building and working in your dad. We just did odds and ends and stuff around Ashland and whatever. But yeah, you and I have definitely had a good relationship over the years.
Yeah, and we grew up in a small town in Central Virginia. Like, we didn't have it so bad, for sure.
Oh,
all right.
No.
I don't know the answer to this question, but I think it's important. How old were you when you first not only tasted alcohol, but experienced the effects of alcohol?
Probably 15 or 16. 14, okay. Maybe.
And your reaction or that first experience, describe it for me. Not in great detail, but at a high level.
Well, it was absolutely amazing. Like, it was just, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, I've arrived. This is the meaning of life. It makes
almost euphoric.
Yeah, it changes everything.
It relaxes you. Fair to say.
It gives you confidence. Yeah,
all those things. And so anybody that this is not an advertisement for drinking alcohol, for sure. And you'll understand that as we go through this story. When do you think you became a pretty constant drinker? How old were you?
So I, as you know, I hung out with some other Richmond fellows that lived in Ashland. Can I mention names?
That's up to you. I'm good. We can use first names.
Yeah, Thomas and Tad, and then their friends in Richmond, and so it was as long as my mom knew that I wasn't out doing something that I shouldn't have been doing. Obviously, I was lying to her, but I did a lot of drinking in high school with those fellas. And then when they went off to school for their freshman year in college, I was a senior in high school, and I spent a lot of time with those guys drinking with other St. Christopher's boys and girls and St. Catherine's boys and girls in Richmond. And And so I know before I even went off to VMI, I know that I loved alcohol, and I also know that going to these parties in Richmond, that I would stay up later than everybody else, and I would continue drinking. Like, people would be done drinking or passed out, and I would still be drinking. And I was like, I would always find the people that were still drinking, and gravitate towards them. So I think I knew very early on that, like, I loved alcohol, and I loved it to a point that was different than other people.
Yeah. So you went to the party, you easily found the after party, and maybe easily found the party after the after party.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect way to say it.
Yeah. Okay. So pretty consistent in high school. You're not alone in that. There were party kids at every high school, right? But the after party and the party after the after party, that crowd was not very big, I would say.
No, it was 2 or 3 people, and you always knew after a few times, you always knew who you were going to be with later, and it was always very gratifying to know that there were at least a couple of other people that drank. Or, I don't even know if I thought that it was a problem at that point. I was just like, man, what's wrong with these people who are going to bed? Like, we're still having fun.
Yeah. Why would you want the fun to end?
Right. Exactly.
All right. So you were experienced, to say the least, by the time you graduated high school, and then you go to a place like VMI where, to the outsider, like, hey, it must be hard to continue that consistent drinking in a place like VMI, especially your rat year. So tell me about alcohol going into college, and then how you added a couple of other substances to the menu.
Yeah. So at VMI, like my rat year, like you mentioned, I didn't drink that much. I remember the very first weekend we got out for a core trip. I was a rat, and we were leaving, and I was riding with somebody who, actually, a St. Chris guy, home, or to Virginia Beach for the core trip. And I think I remember drinking 14 beers from Lexington to Richmond. And I remember
seems like a
first
lot.
class. What's that?
That seems like a lot, but maybe
it's a very lot in 2.5 hour trip.
Yeah.
And I remember the guy that I was with saying, man, you really can put those down, and you're okay. You handle yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is what I do. And, but I never, we weren't allowed, we couldn't drink in barracks. We couldn't drink, but, we had friends at W&L. We were able to sneak out. We were able to do things that we weren't supposed to do. And so and at VMI, it was a horrible, horrible existence. It's a terrible place to be, but a great place to be from. But while we were there, the, Misery and Joy's Company, or company, something like that. And so, yeah. And so we all drank. I've got 17 or 18 very, very, very close brother rats that we're still on a text chain with, that we've been on for, I don't know, 27, however long that cell phones have been around and texting's been around, that we're still, texting. And 3 of those 17 guys are recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. I'm one of them. And so we forged a bond at VMI because of how horrible the experience was. Even when your rat year's over, it's still a military school. And my girlfriend went to UVA, and I couldn't go over there every weekend. I couldn't go over to W&L every night. And it was just a horrible, even when you're a senior at VMI, it's a horrible experience, because what everybody else is experiencing in real college. And so what we did is we found opportunities to go to JMU, to go to UVA, to go to W&L, to go to the women's schools, and drink and drink and drink. And I think if you talk to a lot of VMI guys, it's a pretty standard thing. The drinking culture. like we had classes 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And so Saturday at noon, you could leave until Sunday at 10 if you're an upperclassman. And those 24 or 36 hours I filled them with drinking. And I think a lot of other guys did too. I knew, I think at the age of 17 or 18, when I was a rat, I was like, wait, I think that I definitely drink differently than these other guys. And I was like, maybe I have a problem, maybe I have an issue. And I remember my mother, never allowing us to have alcohol in the house. My father's father was an alcoholic. My father's brother, my uncle, is an alcoholic, drug addict. I've got 2 other cousins who are in recovery, and we come from a very lovely family. So it's not like it discriminates. It only hits folks that. I guess what I'm saying is that everybody is affected by addictions, and so I knew, my mother never allowed alcohol in the house because she didn't think that she knew that my dad was, predisposed, is that the right word, to maybe an issue if he did. And so I think that was the fact that it was so taboo growing up, that obviously made it more enticing for me. And so I did. I drank alcohol a lot, and I knew that I was probably an alcoholic. And I can remember thinking, okay, well, maybe if I'm an alcoholic, at least like there are probably a bunch of other guys too, and it's no big deal. We'll figure it out, or I'll get the help that I need, before I graduate, or before I get out of the rat year, before I get out of second class year, or whatever, or before I start a career. Once I start a real career, then I won't drink as much, or once I do this, then I won't drink as much. And maybe it'll work itself out. And it did. It worked itself out, 35 years later.
Yeah, it sounds like you had thousands of date-oriented goals to stop or slow down anyway. But before,
oh yeah, for 5 years, absolutely, yeah, for sure. Like when my first move from Richmond was to Colorado. I went out there and skied for a few months after VMI, and then came back and started working in hotel finance. And it was such a huge opportunity to drink. We would always have after work events or parties where we were entertaining clients and all kinds of stuff. It was just a very big opportunity to drink and enjoy that lifestyle. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm a staff accountant. Once I become an assistant controller, I'll curtail my drinking. And then I remember thinking, well, once I become a controller or a director of finance, then I'll really have to stop. And, I went to VMI thinking that I was going to be a doctor because I thought VMI was going to make me study and make me be disciplined. I mean, I grew up with discipline and a modicum of sense because it was instilled in me by my parents. But I also went to VMI thinking, man, I need to not probably drink as much. And if I go to VMI, I won't be able to drink as much. And not only did it foster my, not only did it not curtail it, but it fostered my habit. So yeah, I knew early on. I knew at probably 17, and then we can start talking about the drugs or the Adderall and the stimulant prescriptions. I knew. I was like, yeah, I know that I'm an addict.
Yeah, let's talk. Well, I think we have to talk about your mom's death. You were at VMI when that happened. Had you started taking Adderall and stimulants before she died?
No. I started taking. My mom died my rat year. She died. She got diagnosed in May of my senior year in high school and died the following June, like 13 months later. Yeah. And so my entire rat year, she was sick. And I remember, I remember the rat year sucked. It was hard. And I can remember praying and saying, gosh, Lord, give me a hard day so that my Mother's Day will be easy. Obviously no rhyme or reason, but like if I have a hard day, then hopefully that means Mom's having a good day. And all the days were hard when we were rats. And I had a very close friend who's very close friend at VMI. I remember him coming after class every day and praying with me over, my mother's sickness. And he's such a wonderful man. He's a close friend. And we would talk about, how it was all in God's hands and all that. And I was totally fine and at peace with that. But I don't know where I'm going with this other than the fact that, my mind was still on, every weekend was on alcohol or something to make me feel different,
Yeah, I mean that is a double whammy of rat year, which is nobody's ever told me it was easy. Everybody's always said it's hard, and then your mom getting a diagnosis and then being gone 13 months later as you're going through that. It's incredible. And look, it sounds like you had people around you that cared about you a lot, but nothing really fought the wave that was your addiction to alcohol.
Nothing at all. Like, and I'll share a quick story and then we'll get to it down the road. But I remember my wife maybe 5 or 6 years ago saying, "What, do you love me?" And I said, "I love you so much I can hardly stand it." So, and then she would say, "Well, why don't you stop drinking or using drugs?" And I would say, "Because I can't." And she didn't understand that.
Yeah, I think non-addicts have a tough time wrapping their heads around that, right?
Absolutely. She had no clue. She was like, just stop making bad decisions. And I was making bad decisions based on my disease. I would have loved to have not been a drug addict or alcoholic and continued being married, but it just didn't. That's not what happened. So we can talk about that.
Tell me about. Well, I'm a little fascinated by the idea of prescription stimulants, which means there's at least another party participating in you getting access to stimulants, right? Or am I wrong there?
Absolutely. Like, so I had a roommate that was on it, and he would give me some, and I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this is life changing." And when they say that, Adderall or Ritalin doesn't work for people who don't have ADD, that's just a bold-faced lie. I mean, Adderall is very, very clean cocaine, and I know exactly what cocaine's about. It's a stimulant that helps you focus, and anybody who's done it will attest to the fact that it works. And I know for sure, I started taking it my third class year. I went to Roanoke and did some tests and met with a psychiatrist. It was after Mom had died, and my girlfriend at UVA had sort of broken up with me a little bit, and we got back together. But Dad had gotten me this help in Lexington, seeing a psychiatrist, and that was very helpful. I'll always be grateful for my father for helping with that. And I got diagnosed with clinical depression and also ADD, and I got on Prozac and Ritalin, and the only way I graduated from college on time was because I had prescription drugs that helped me focus.
And so, both the Adderall and the Ritalin were. I mean, is that the stimulant you were talking about?
Yeah, it is. Ritalin is what I was on for years and years. I started doing Adderall in my adult life, and we can explain that. I'll explain that. But yeah, they're both prescribed stimulants.
And so they're prescribed in good faith to help you with focus and with depression.
Well, there is some school of thought that the Adderall helps with depression. The Prozac was definitely for the depression. But yes, the answer is yes. I mean, it definitely focuses on the ADD, the ADHD, and then I can remember like being like, I don't know if frantic's the word, but being very, very out of sorts if I didn't know where my next prescription was coming from, or in time, or I remember one time it got delivered to, Sneed Street in Ashland, and it should have been delivered to Lexington. And I remember getting in the car and driving from Lexington to home to get it, and then driving right back to VMI, it's 6-hour round trip. And because I needed the drugs. It was, it was probably, I think I knew then, like, man, this is good. This helps. It helps with everything. It helps with any task that you need to be focused with. It helps with cleaning. It helps with doing yard work. It helps with whatever you want to do. Or at least it helped me. Somebody might dispute that. But like I can talk about how I was able to, pull the wool over my doctor's eyes in Boston. I lived in Boston for 24 years or 25 years. And, so basically I used prescription stimulants, and then I stopped. I lived in Chicago for a time, still in the hotel business. And then moved from Chicago to Boston. When I moved to Boston, that's when I stopped doing stimulants, but that's when my drinking really, really, really took off. I was living in Boston. I was a bachelor. I met my wife at the hotel there, but I wasn't doing the stimulants then. And
hey, Gray, before we talk about heavy drinking in Boston, were was there a time where you were using the prescription drugs as prescribed, and then you got into a place where you're like, I'm now going to manipulate this doctor or several doctors to take it in a way that's abusive?
Yes, the answer to your question is yes, and I'll explain. Is that I think I tried to take it as prescribed maybe the first 2 weeks that I had it, or 3 weeks that I had it, my sophomore year in college, and then realized I can't take this as prescribed. I got it, and I'm going to abuse it.
And so did you go to multiple doctors? Did you lie to the first prescriber, but both?
Yeah. I would lie to doctors. I would lie to pharmacists. Like, it's like, I think back, I went to the pharmacy at the Walmart in Lexington one time, and like, every time I would go, I'd be like, man, are they going to fill it? Is the insurance going to like call the cops on me? Just weird thoughts. But I was always able to get what I needed when I needed it, whether it was through, I remember saying to my doctor one time, I need like 3 times what you're giving me. And he did. Like, I think he bought what I was, I don't know. There were so many opportunities in my life, and opportunities not the right, but there were so many instances in my life where it should have happened, like either a DUI that got swept under the rug, or a doctor who was facilitating my drug use. I don't blame anybody but myself, obviously. Or a judge in a courtroom who told me to get out of the courtroom because the prosecutor was one of my brother rats. Like, all kinds of things that happened that could have, like, maybe had I gotten in trouble, it would have set off an alarm that, hey, you maybe need to get some help. But it didn't.
Yeah, great. You're talking about there are two powerful forces at play there. One is greed, right? People are, hey, the thing you want, if I facilitate, I maybe make a few more bucks this month. Okay, fine. I'm not saying all doctors are like that, but some doctors certainly are. I've experienced them personally. And then the other powerful force is people think they're doing you a favor by letting you off the hook and actually taking you down the more painful path, because they know in the end it's right for you. If they really loved you, if they were really your friend, they wouldn't allow you access to the easy path. And so, yeah, it's tough it stinks to wrap your mind around it, but most of humanity is like that. How many times
Yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, the guy that pissed me off, he did the right thing for me. No, he just pissed me off. But actually, wow, being pissed off took me down this path that actually helped me.
Yeah, so I'd share with people in my AA group or at church or in AA or work. I work part-time at the Home Depot, and I love it. The Lord led me there. We talk about that. But like, I share all the time that I never had any issues with finance, legal, business. I held down some high-level positions in the hospitality finance world. Like never had any issues with any of that. Managed lots of people, and not a lot of people in different situations. And I always, my excuse was, well, obviously my drugs and alcohol aren't an issue because I'm able to do what I do. Like I was married for 16 years, or I was with her for 19 years, and I was like, when it becomes an issue, that's probably when I'll get the help I need. And I remember asking my wife, and this may be putting the cart before the horse in our conversation here, but I remember telling my wife that I needed help. And she was like, well, just stop. She didn't understand that it's not that easy. And so I remember telling myself, I always telling myself, I would make deals with myself. Like, I shouldn't drink these days, and I won't use these days, and that kind of stuff. But I remember saying, once something breaks is when I'll get the help I needed. And what broke was my wife leaving me. And we can get into detail of that in a minute, but and explain what happened there. But yeah, I'll let you continue leading the conversation, and I'll answer any questions. But it was, drugs and alcohol were definitely a contributing factor to how I woke up and lived my life every single day. I don't know if contributing factor or where, it was, I didn't understand that there was a possibility of living a life without drugs and alcohol. I never registered with me.
Yeah, it sounds like you jumped in the deep end when you were a teenager and you stayed there. And so let's go back to Boston, where you said your drinking picked up, which I now know enough of your story to think, wow, if it picked up, my gosh, that's got to be some sort of world record level sort of thing. And it also speaks to, because you mentioned you stopped the stimulants, or at least slowed them down dramatically. It sounds like because you stopped the stimulants, you had to fill that with something, and that ended up becoming more alcohol.
Absolutely. And let me just convey a really quick story. We went to the Hub Pub, which was our local right across the street from the hotel. And we were well known there. The hotel was there, and the bartenders knew us, and we would drink for $7 and have copious amounts of beer every time because the bartenders knew us and we would take care of them. And I remember one Saturday afternoon, I went in there. I was doing an inventory at the hotel at a month in, one early Saturday morning, and got out around noon and went over to the Hub Pub, and I started drinking, and was probably watching a baseball game or something. And I remember leaving. I don't know why I left, but Willie was the bartender, and I remember getting the tab. The tab was usually about $27 or $30 or whatever, for a lot of alcohol. And I remember getting the tab, and it was over $100. And I said, Willie, what in the world is this? And it was just me drinking on it. I remember Joe and I had done some, helped some guys do something, like move a box or something. And then we went into the Hub Pub, and then Joe had something else going on. So I remember I was there by myself, but it wasn't really by myself because I knew the bartenders and I knew other people coming and going from the hotel. And so I was on my own tab. And I remember the tab was either 107 or 170. I can't remember. And I said, Willie, what in the world is going on here? And Willie goes, I had to do it, Gray. And I said, what's that? He goes, usually I don't count how many beers you have because I don't put them on the tab. He goes, I wanted to see how many beers you could drink here in this city. He didn't tell me while I was doing it. There were 29 beers on the tab.
And I'm sorry, what was the time frame again?
7 hours, 7 or 8 hours.
That's a lot of beer, man.
Yeah, it's like It's like what's their buddy's name from the who played for the Red Sox? What was his name? He would drink like 24 Miller Lights on the cross country trips. What's his name?
Yeah.
Famous. Wade Boggs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That was
so I drink
Wade Boggs level.
Yeah. So Willie said, "You're amazing." He goes, "You're walking out of here, and I served you 29 beers."
What was he doing it to just like it was a fun trivia fact, or was it like, hey, dude, maybe you need to slow down?
No. It was clearly like, wow, we know that you're a professional drinker. I mean, I didn't garner a paycheck from drinking, but and we just wanted to see how many you could drink, and we're impressed. Like, it was nothing like you have a problem, because like it's not like I was walking out of there after getting into a bar fight or being belligerent to anybody. I was as lovely as I could be, probably from the minute I left, from the minute that I came in. And he goes, "I just wanted to see how many you could drink."
Yeah, and yeah, I know you. You're going to be a nice, lovely guy, sober or intoxicated. But 29, yeah, I have a tough time wrapping my head around that. That's just a lot of beer.
Yeah, it's Bud Light. Bud Light's not high alcohol. I couldn't have drank 29 IPAs, but regardless, 29 beers is an absurd amount of beer.
Yeah, and you were in Boston, you said, for 24 years, and did you maintain that level of drinking? Or
so, I mean, probably not every. I drink daily, and until I met my wife, and then we moved, or we lived together after we'd been dating about a year. Then we moved in with each other, got engaged, and I remember her telling me after the fact she didn't realize that my drinking was an issue, because I would drink 12 to 14 beers every night, and I remember her saying, "I didn't realize that was a problem. I just thought that you just drank more beers than my father," like her father, like, who would come home from work, from his construction business and drink 2 beers and then go take a shower and then have dinner with milk and then have a piece of chocolate and go to bed. Like, I would drink beer and then drink more beer and then drink more beer. And yeah, it was so no, I think, but I was always yeah, I just don't think that, and she was young. She was 9 years younger than me. And I think that she was just naive, didn't understand what it was about until later in our marriage.
Yeah. So I know at some point it wasn't about prescribed stimulants. It was about what I would call harder illicit substances. Can you tell me what was happening when that started?
Yeah, Yeah, so I worked after college. I worked around town a little bit before I moved to Colorado, and then in Colorado, I think I did cocaine for the first time, and I was like, oh wow, this is fantastic. It's just like Ritalin or whatever. It's more expensive, obviously, and it was illegal, obviously. So I've always enjoyed the stimulant, like the feeling up or feeling focused. And so I did that for a little bit. And then when I moved to Chicago, I had some friends that were into it, and occasionally we would get some and do it. But really what turned my habit into, I'm happy to talk about it if you're allow it on your podcast, into
Sure.
Heavy illicit drug use, was the fact that I had Adderall prescribed to me, and I would get, and then I would use it all in a weekend or in a week. And my wife was like, "What are you doing? Like, what's going on?" And so she used to sequester it, and she would hide it, and she would allocate it and give me the 1 pill a day that I'm allotted from the prescription. And then I would find it and I would take it, knowing that the repercussions weren't going to be good. and like we would fight, and there were issues, and there were marital issues because of my drug use and my drinking. And it wasn't fair to her, obviously. I mean, that's we can talk about all that on a whole different podcast, but it got to the point one time where I had found the prescriptions that she was hiding. And she said, no more, you can't have any more prescriptions in the house, like no more stimulants. And that's when I found a cocaine dealer. And I was buying, my heavy use started in February of 22. My heavy use, like 2 ounces a month, which is about $3,500 a month in cocaine. And I was using it, and it was high dollar, high value cocaine, and I was snorting it, and I was in my basement office, and my wife was like, "What's going on with your nose? Like, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know, And I was like, "I can't keep this up," so I started injecting it into my muscles, intramuscularly, and then I would have bruises, on my thighs, and she would occasionally wonder what those were. And then it got to the point where I just couldn't be naked in front of her because I had these bruises where I was injecting. And then I was like, man, I've got to find something that's better. And I started doing an IV. I started being an IV drug user. As I'm, the director of finance, director of treasury for this company, and managing processes and people and being on phone calls and dealing with, MasterCard, Visa, all the bank cards, and 43 different banking relationships and debits and credits and balance sheets and finding time to inject drugs intravenously.
The journey makes a lot of sense if you start with the premise that the addict is going to go to wherever he or she needs to go to get what their disease says they need, right?
That's exactly right, Paul. And it goes back to what I conveyed earlier about my wife would say, "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you so much I can hardly stand it." "Well, then why don't you stop?" "Because I can't." And that's what it is. Like I needed something that would make me feel differently, or make me feel bulletproof, or make me feel better from coming down from the previous day's use. I remember one time I was out for 8 days, just high as a kite, and but still working and doing meetings. And I'm sure people I don't know. Maybe some people thought that I acted differently. I mean, I was always pretty much high. I remember one time I love Lego. I think you know that, right? Yeah. And I had lots of Lego sets, and my office looked kind of like a Lego museum, and I would put Lego together when I was high. I loved doing that after work, and I alienated my wife. I didn't spend time with her, watch TV, or do anything like that as much as I should have. And or not should, but as much as a loving relationship would entail. And I remember showing somebody all my Lego one time and saying it's a expensive hobby. And I remember them saying, "Well, at least you don't have a nasty cocaine habit." And I remember thinking, yes, I do have a nasty cocaine habit.
Wow.
Right. And
wow.
And so, like if that's the only thing you're spending your money on, that's fine. Well, it wasn't. And so I became an IV drug user. And if I can just share what happened, I was using, and I knew that something was right because I was spending so much money. So I started that in February of 22, and then July 4th, 2022, I was entertaining. I always like to entertain on July 4th, and cook and have beers and have neighbors and friends over, and I was sneaking into the back door of my office, basement office, and using while everybody was out, having fun. And that night after everybody had left, I was down in my office injecting, and I remember my wife coming down the stairs, and I was able to hide it. I was always having to hide syringes or hide bloody, gauze pads, or hide tourniquets, or hide, paraphernalia, or blood splatter on my desk, not to be too graphic. But I was able to there were a couple of times where she came down and I was and I was able to hide it. And then she goes, "Why don't you go up and take a shower and call it a night?" And I did. And then I was in the shower, and she came up and threw my syringes and my cocaine and all my stuff into the shower and said, "It all makes sense." And that was the last time I saw her. And that was July 4th, 2022. I saw her in court at our divorce hearing. That was it. It was the rock bottom where I was like, okay, I always knew I needed help, like an inpatient rehab. I always knew I needed that. And she was like, "Why don't you just make a decision not to do it?" And I said, I can't. So she left. And then the very next day, I got a text from her sister and said, "You need to be out of the house. We're coming by." And I was like, whatever. I was down in the basement. There were so many times where things were so bad that I knew that it was going to take a while for us to start talking again, or to get back together in a loving manner. So I just assumed it was going to be a long process to get back together, and it, obviously we didn't. And so I was downstairs on July 5th, and I could hear them upstairs, and I was like, "What are they doing?" And I remember her sister coming down and said, "Good luck." And I didn't know what that meant. And I went upstairs, and the house was empty. All of her clothes were gone, and her desk was gone, and they had moved all of her stuff out to her parents' house. I was like, "Oh, this is it. This is it."
Yeah, she was done. Yeah.
She was done, and I don't blame her one bit. She had to vacate the marriage. And I called my cousin, who has a son who struggled with addiction, because I needed to see what her advice was for a rehab. My first thought was, I want to go to Long Beach or California or whatever and play tennis and sit by the pool while they try to explain to me that drugs aren't the right thing. And she's like, "No, that's not what you need. They'll take your money, but it probably won't be what is your help. What'll get you the help?" And she mentioned this place in Greensboro, North Carolina called Fellowship Hall. And she goes, "It just so happens that she had just finished there 6 months earlier. She had been in rehab, and I didn't know it." She and I were always big drinkers together. She's the oldest cousin. I'm the youngest, and we would go on ski trips or whatever. Long story short, I called them and got a bed for 6 days later, July 14th or 15th, 2022, and went down. John flew up to Boston, helped me get the house together and cleaned up. I thought I was getting the house together in a nice manner. And then I assumed that I would be back in 28 days or 30 days or whatever. And then we would continue rebuilding our relationship. And I've never seen the house since then. I've only been to Boston one time since the day I left in 2022, and that was the divorce hearing. And so I went to Greensboro, North Carolina for 14 days or 10 days or however many days it was, 13 days. Man, this is horrible. This is horrible. This is horrible. How am I ever going to live my life again without drugs and alcohol? It's going to be horrible. Maybe I'll save a marriage, and maybe maybe I won't die, but I'll never have fun again. And the men would come in and talk about how wonderful sobriety was and how wonderful a life it was to live free from the constraints and the whatever that drugs and alcohol put on you. And I knew for sure that they were full of shit, and I knew that they were paid actors. And I was wrong, because something happened to me on July 27th that we can talk about now or later. You tell me how you want to do it. But I finally had gotten the help that I needed by going to rehab, by checking into a rehab facility in Greensboro. And boy, what an amazing thing that happened that started turning my life around. And
so from the 14th or 15th to the 27th, you were like, this isn't going to work for me. Everybody's full of it. How long was the stay going to be total?
28 days. Like, and you know what, Paul, I wasn't, some guys come in there knowing they're going to drink the second they get out. They're either court ordered or their parents make them go. I went in with an open attitude. Like, yeah, I did know. I went in thinking, this is it. Like, I can't drink anymore, but it's going to be a hard life. Like, it's not going to be fun. Like, how will I go to a wedding, or how will I go to without drinking? So I was receptive. I have a modicum of sense in the fact that I knew, like, I sent myself there because I knew I needed the help. And so I listened and I read and I did what they told me to do. It's not like I had a bad attitude towards it. I just had an attitude of indifference, like, man, this is really going to suck the rest of my life. And then on the 27th.
Yeah, hold on before you go there.
Changed.
Yeah, before you tell that part of the story, which obviously was the it was the turning point. It was the most critical moment, arguably, in your life. Was rehab just sort of a boilerplate? You're going to come here and we're going to help you become clean and sober, or was it wrapped in faith in God, or was it wrapped in something else, or was it just pretty straightforward? We're here to help you get clean.
That's a great question, because there are faith-based and Christ-based recoveries. This one, my personal counselor happened to be a Christian, but no. In fact, we weren't allowed to have Bible study together. Like, if we were allowed to have Bibles in our room, we weren't allowed to have our computers, our phones, or any secular books. But we could have a Bible, but we couldn't congregate and read Bibles together. We had to do it in our rooms. So it was so as not to alienate anybody, I guess. So that's a good question. I didn't go to Fellowship Hall because it was faith-based, because at that point in my life, I didn't have any faith. Like, I remember thinking, man, when I pray, I feel like such a hypocrite, because I'm a drug addict and I'm an alcoholic. So why would God show me any grace? And boy, was I wrong. And when I got there, I remember meeting with the doctor, and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "To save my marriage." And he said, "Wrong answer." He said, "This is all about you. This is completely 100% about you. It has nothing to do with anybody else." So I understood that after he explained that to me, and that's what rehab's all about, is we have to be selfish in our recovery. We have to do what isn't going to get us clean and sober. And so I embraced that, and I did the homework, and I studied what my counselor told me to study, and I listened in the class, and I made friends. I make friends very easily. That's not meant to be prideful. It's just a blessing that I have, and a God-given blessing. I really enjoyed the fellowship with the other men, and boys, actually. I mean, there were some young kids there, but just knew it was going to be a very tough life outside. I figured I'd get out in 28 days, go back to Boston, take a few weeks off from work. 99.9% of the stuff that happens around me, I have no control over, but I have 100% of control of how I react to it. And so just learning all those types of things, Instead of getting angry about the woman or the man who's writing a check at the grocery store in front of me, or instead of getting angry about traffic, do something differently, like pray or meditate, or, just, we can get into that too in a minute, but yes. So, to answer your question, I think, I've been kind of long-winded, but to answer your question, it wasn't faith-based. I had I grew up a Christian. I was baptized at 14 in our church, Dr. Ellis, and, went to church every Sunday like you did until I went to college, and then that was it. That was it. I always knew that Christ was my Savior, but I didn't live a Christ-led life. I didn't live a life that was glorifying to Him, and we can talk about this too, but I just didn't have any relationship with God or Jesus Christ. And I remember talking to that same doctor that said when I told him the reason I was there was to save a marriage, he said, wrong answer. I remember talking to him as well and saying that I felt like a hypocrite praying because, I had left God. I hadn't been faithful. And he said, well, you may have left God, but He never left you. And that was pretty instrumental too.
Yeah, I imagine that hit pretty hard too. All right, so let's go to the 27th. Did it start like any other day?
Yeah, it was just like any other day. I think I was enjoying the fellowship. It was certainly like a cocoon, and like, man, this is easy life. Like, the real world is out there. I didn't have a phone, didn't have a computer, and I was in there and I was enjoying what I was learning, but still absolutely terrified about what was going to happen when I got out. I get emotional every time I talk about it, but I went to bed that night, and I think the lights were still on. Maybe I was reading the Bible. Maybe I was reading some stuff that I was supposed to read for homework. And God spoke to me audibly.
Do you remember exactly what He said? Do you remember exactly what He said?
It was like a bright light. Like, I just remember being like, oh my gosh, there's something happening here. And a voice said, Gray, this isn't about drugs and alcohol. This is about returning to me. And that was it.
And very few words completely turned your life around.
Completely.
That encounter and those words completely turned your life around.
That from that moment, I haven't had a single desire to use drugs or alcohol.
Say that word again.
From that very moment, I have not had a single desire to use drugs or alcohol.
And that floors you, right? Because you know what your life was like before you went into rehab.
Yes.
It was
absolutely, yeah, it was, like I was thinking before that moment, I was like, okay, I'm doing all this stuff, but when I get out, like, how am I going to steer past the liquor store? How am I going to not engage my drug dealer? How am I going to go to a party without drinking? And ever since that night, I haven't, those aren't questions that I have any longer.
And you so lack the urge, and I'll just throw this in here because it popped into my head. You have somehow figured out, as an addict, a recovering addict, that you can be a part owner in a bar/restaurant. That's wild. I think most people would say, absolutely, the last thing you should go do as an addict is to put yourself in that environment. But you're in that environment from time to time because you're a part owner, and it's not a problem at all because even when you're there, the urge doesn't hit you.
Yeah, no, I took 15 people from Home Depot there last Friday night for somebody's going away, and a couple of them know that I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and they were saying, does this not bother you being around all of this liquor that's yours, that you own? And I was like, not one bit. Like, it has, like, there. So I do AA and I do NA, and there are people who, I've got 3 years that I'm clean and sober. It'll be on 3 years on July 14th this year. And I go to these meetings every morning. I haven't been going recently, and it's because I can share that, or we don't have to talk about it. But I get so much out of the fellowship and the maintenance of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that I know were divinely handed down to the founders. But I hear people share their stories every single day who are 25 and 30 years clean and sober, who get up and the first thing they do is get on the floor, and knees on the floor, elbows on the edge of the bed, and plead with God or God of their understanding, whoever their higher power is, to help them stay clean and sober for the day. And I cannot relate to that. And I don't share that because I don't want to come across as obtuse or arrogant or prideful. Pride was something that I was part of my story. I always refer to you as probably one of the humblest guys I know. And I always want, like, that's what I have learned to become more of in my sobriety is humble. And it's a good way to live. But to get back to what I was saying is that these people who have 30 years of sobriety, who beg and plead for their higher power to keep them sober today, I don't know what that's about. I don't know what that's like. And so I almost feel guilty. I almost feel guilty, but I understand that I don't need to feel guilty, and I shouldn't feel guilty. I just am so grateful for the blessing that God gave me.
Yeah, Gray, I apologize for bouncing around here. And I think I know the answer, but I feel compelled to fill this gap in. When you were drinking and using, were you keeping it a secret from every living soul, or was there somebody in your life that knew besides your dealer knew that you were using, right?
That's a great point. My dealer knew about my cocaine habit. He's the only one that knew. And I remember one time going to him and saying, "How do your guys like it?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, obviously you're dealing, right, because of the volume." And I said, "No, I'm the user." And he goes, "Well, be careful." Wow. I mean, this is a big-wig drug dealer. And he told me, it's basically like Willie at the bar. He's like, "I just wanted to see him, nothing like, actually, the drug dealer gave me better advice than Willie. He's like, be careful." Like, he literally said, "How do your guys like my stuff?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I'm the user. But yes, nobody had any idea that I was an IV drug user. Nobody. And I was very clean. I didn't read needles. I was very, very fastidious about my habit, which gave me, I guess, right? But but nobody knew. Nobody knew about that. My wife knew about my drinking. She knew about my prescription drug issues, but not a single soul knew about IVs.
So I have to ask, how quickly did you make it through the 12 steps?
I did. I started them in August of 22, or maybe September of 22. I got my sponsor, and I feel like I probably got through the 12th step. But we're always working the steps. I mean, as recovering, we're
first time around.
Yeah, first time around probably took 15 or 16 months.
Yeah. What was the toughest step?
So fourth is writing the inventory about our fears, resentments, angers, thoughts, and misconduct, things that we did to people, things that we feared, that kind of stuff. But the fifth step is definitely, a hard one where you talk about it. You talk to God about it, your higher power, and then you talk to another human being, usually your sponsor. So probably 5, but 9 is the step where we make amends. I wrote a long letter to my wife, and like the first 2 amends, as we learn in the program, that the amends about us are about us clearing our side of the street. It's not about us seeking forgiveness. It's about us making amends for what we did, and then that's it. Like, we can't have any expectations for how that's going to go. Obviously we like for it to go well. There were 2 women in Chicago that were the first 2 amends I made, saying I apologize for some of the things that I did, a lot of the things I did. And I just assumed that they were going to be like, oh, we love you, it's okay. But they both told me to fuck off. And,
wow.
Yeah. And so, part of my language, but we know that from the program, and it's not about how they react. It's just us clearing our side of the street. And the amends I made with Dan. Go ahead.
I was just saying, it's about you being focused on yourself and focusing on things that you can control. Right.
Well, yeah, like saying we're sorry for what we did in the past. And then step 10 is making daily amends. Like, as things happen throughout the day, then being emotionally intelligent and either saying I'm sorry, or before something happens that you have to make an amends for, making a good decision in the moment so you don't have to make an amends,
Yeah.
And so that's step 10. But so, I'll have amends to make for the rest of my life, because I'll wake up and be like, oh my gosh, that's an amend I need to make that I didn't have on my 4th step or my 7th step. Sorry, 8th step is where we make the list. And so, the first 2 didn't go well. And then I made last Christmas, not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before, I did some amends to Dad and John, and it was very well received in a loving manner. And that was nice. And then I wrote a letter to my wife, and I don't know if she read it. I don't know. It's none of my business what she did with the letter. And but I got the letter and did the amends. So yeah. So the 12 steps are pretty amazing. They work. But I'll share with you. I don't know if we want to go this route, but what works for me is my spirituality. Is my faith in God and my personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
All right, well, let's do this. Walk me through a typical day. Pick a day that you're spending a few hours at Home Depot, but what's that full day look like? How's it start and how's it end?
So I typically wake up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning. This morning I got up a little earlier because I had a breakfast meeting at 8 a.m. But I'll typically get up between 3:30 and 4:30 maybe, and I immediately go to prayer. I get up, I put clothes on, and I sit in my living room or my chair, and I pray for probably 15 minutes. I seek guidance for the day. I thank God for the morning that I ask for forgiveness for my sins from yesterday. Try to rethink about what happened. And that's also part of the 10th step, daily amends, making daily amends or making daily inventory to make sure that you don't have to make amends. And then I read the Bible. I read scripture. I read the Old Testament and New Testament. I read the Bible, the whole Bible, through the whole year. I read the entire Bible and understood for the first time the importance of the Old Testament. Growing up evangelical Christian, we focus on the gospel and not realizing how important the Old Testament is. And so I read scripture and then meditate. I do Christ-based meditation. So I do about 2 hours, much like not leaving the house without putting on a pair of pants or brushing your teeth. I don't leave the house without getting close with God and Jesus Christ. And it's an amazing way to start the day and live my life. Like, I don't have like fear any longer. Like, if I do, then I'm able to immediately go to prayer. Like, the 11th step is through constant conscious contact with our higher powers, and through prayer meditation, meaning maintaining a constant contact with our higher power. And that's what I do. You know, a lot of people talk about praying at night or in the morning, but I pray all day long. There's probably not 30 or 45 minutes during the day that I'm not praying or thinking about Jesus Christ. And it's how I live my life, and it's pretty overwhelming. In a good way.
Sorry, my dogs were barking. I had to put it on mute for a second.
But you heard me, right?
I heard everything. I was the one muted. Do you think you'll get to a place where you're not overwhelmed, or you want to be overwhelmed because it's such a positive thing?
It's an overwhelming in a positive manner. Like I I moved down here to Atlanta to in August to kind of push some things forward with the bar and restaurant that you mentioned, and thinking I was only going to be here for 4 or 5 weeks, God clearly led me in a different manner, and I found the church here. I'm going to Italy in June on a mission trip.
I love how you say Italy. Italy.
What did I say?
You said Italy.
Italy.
Yeah.
I just I can't get enough of Jesus Christ in my life, and in a good way. Like I remember having breakfast with my grandparents as a kid before we'd go out fishing or whatever we would do in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And they would talk about the importance of witnessing and telling others about our faith. And it never took. And I remember having a conversation with my father in a hotel room in Raleigh, North Carolina, 20 some years ago. And he was asking me about my faith and what I was doing for church. And I said, Dad, I'm not doing anything. I know that Christ is my savior, but I'm not telling anybody about it. I said, I don't need to. It's not important. As long as I know that I'm saved. And boy, was I wrong about that. And what God has led me to do and is to witness. And so I talk to people as, part of my prayers in the morning are to find the love and forgiveness and happiness, and not happiness, but joy in every single situation and encounter that I have. And then to also place somebody in my path that I can share the good news of Christ with. And I do every day. Somehow every day, somehow it's, how arrogant of me to say, somehow God finds a way. He places somebody in my path to talk to. I was telling somebody I was pumping gas to yesterday or the other day about my love of Jesus Christ. And that's how I live my life.
Have some of your relationships changed with how dramatically your life has changed in the last 3 years or 2.5 years?
Yes, completely. That's a very good question and valid question. And they told us that, they taught us that in rehab, that like, if this is going to be a new lifestyle for us, then relationships will change. And so I have seen a change in relationships based on my, sobriety, but also based on my spirituality. And it's okay. Like, it is so okay. And it's all obviously fostered other relationships. So
have you lost friends?
Yeah, I have. And it's not because I've alienated them. It's just that, like, you should let your father know that I spend a lot of time listening to C.S. Lewis sermons, and he's so clear. People may not know that C.S. Lewis was like a leading atheist. And then his quote is that he lost his faith in atheism, which is amazing, and that's how he found his love of God and his love of Christ. And, he talks about seasons in our life and how they're all God. And so, yeah, so like even very close friends in recovery aren't close friends anymore because we don't have the same things in common, and it's okay. And I think they understand that, it's not like we don't like each other, or it's not like that we don't, it's just, we don't have the same thing. Yes. To answer your question, yes, I have lost friends, but I don't call it being lost. I don't think it's losing friends. I think it's just a change in the season of my life.
Fair enough. All right. So what do you think life looks like? I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Like first and foremost, God and Christ will remain at the center of my life. I have, I spent 20 some years in hospitality finance and realized a couple of years ago that it's just not for me any longer. And have gotten into some business ventures with some close, business partners. That's why I'm here in Atlanta for the restaurant and the bar. And then I have a couple of things going on in Virginia. So where I see myself in 10 years is just being a steward of the gifts that God gives me in a way that glorifies him the most. And I don't know if that means helping others in recovery or witnessing to people to talk about my faith or missions work in America or overseas. Obviously I'm going to Italy in June. But I don't know. And what's funny, Paul, it's a great question. And the answer is, I don't know. And what a peaceful feeling that is, because all I need to do is pray for God's will to work in my life and trust that it will. I mean, that's the easiest thing we have to do, but it's also the hardest thing. And so where I am in 5 years is completely unknown to me, but I have so much peace knowing that I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to wonder where I'll be in 5 years because I have such a clear connection with God and Jesus Christ.
All right. You do not have to answer this question, but do you want to share why you're learning Spanish now?
I do. I had a Colombian girlfriend. She broke up with me 2 weeks ago.
Oh no.
So it's crazy, Paul. In fact, I've got my Spanish here.
I mean, you were in, right? Great. Hold on. You were taking Spanish. That's how into the relationship you were.
I am. I still am. Like, I'm still taking Spanish. I hired a professor in Peru, and we meet twice a week for an hour online, just the two of us. And I'm going to continue taking the lessons. But yeah, the relationship is on hiatus now. Who knows? My heart aches a little bit, but again, that's another thing that I just can't. I can't dwell on because I know that not all things are good, but all things work for good, and so I'll just trust, But I'm going to continue learning Spanish because I really enjoy it, and I speak. I have enough now where the guys at Home Depot know to come to me because I can speak Spanish with them about specific questions for their orders and stuff, and they're very impressed. They, the gringo who speaks Spanish, and so.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah, I love it. So that's it. That's there's so many amazing things that are happening in my life that, we could talk all day about, but we're not going to. And maybe I'll come back on your show in 2 years.
Yeah, hopefully, your life will be just as blissful as it is now, and you don't have some dramatic turn, because I can't imagine anything worse than that. One of my final questions, Gray, is what would your mom think of of your life these days?
So that's a great point. I always, I grew up in a loving family. I had a wonderful grandfather, loving father. I've highly, highly respected your father and looked up to him a lot. And I never understood how I was going to become a man like, say, my grandfather or your father. And now I have become the man that I thought I could never be because of the spirituality and the sobriety. And so I think that my mother would be very, I think regardless, I think she would have been proud of me regardless of what happened, but even more so now that I've chosen to live a different life. I don't know that I've chosen. I think that the gift that I was given on the 27th of July, 2022 is that was it. That was it.
Yeah. Well, look, I knew your mom to say I was 24 and had been around her a fair amount. To your point, she would unconditionally love you no matter what your life was like. But I think she would be proud and very, very happy.
I appreciate that, Paul. I've always respected your opinion and your humility, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you telling the story. Look, it takes a ton of courage to be as vulnerable as you were when we spoke weeks ago, and then to be willing to record your story like this. Not everybody's willing to do that, and so I know that your courage, your conviction, your confidence they're at all-time highs, right? And you're not coming down from those heights.
Yeah, like it's funny that you mentioned that. I know, like, I hope that whoever views this podcast will, like, I'm doing what I'm doing because the Lord has led me to be a steward of the blessings that He's given me to help others with either their spirituality or their addictions. And so I forget what you just said. Sorry, but yes,
No, you're fine.
What did you say right before that?
I basically said you're at great heights.
Oh yeah. I've felt like this. I've had a very positive outlook for 3 years, and a lot of times they call it the pink cloud in sobriety, and they're like, "Oh, you're going to come down." I haven't come down off that yet, and I know that I won't because of my spirituality, not because of my sobriety. And some people in the program might disagree with me, but I know that my emotional sobriety and my peace comes from God and Christ, not from my sobriety, but my sobriety was given to me by them.
Yeah. So. Well, hey, dude, I don't get down to Atlanta much these days, but I'm definitely, when I do get down there, I'll come swing by and see you and your brother. Okay,
I got to come up there in a few weeks, so I'll make the rounds. But
are you coming to see your dad?
I can't think of it all. I got to go see my dad, and then I've got to go to West Virginia to pick up a couple things for the restaurant down here that happen to be in West Virginia.
All right. I'll end the recording, and I'm curious what you're picking up in West Virginia.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.